the Superscope Storyteller presents Alice in Wonderland.
The Court of Cards. Who would have thought that a dream world like this actually existed? It was definitely a place where the uncommon was quite common, beyond even the most colorful imagination. Yet here Alice stood, next to a large rose tree, in the middle of Wonderland. It had all begun just a few days ago, when Alice followed a white rabbit into a large rabbit hole and slipped into a deep well. After gently floating to the bottom, she discovered this strange land. Alice had been chasing the rabbit ever since then, but he always managed to avoid her. As she admired the beautiful garden, she happened to notice 3 oddly shaped men who looked very much like playing cards.
Watch out, Five.
They appeared to be gardeners and were tending to one of the rose trees.
That's right, Five. Always lay
The 3 were busily engaged in painting the roses red. Alice, being very inquisitive, took little time in approaching the trio.
Would you please tell me why you are painting the roses?
Well, you see, miss, this was supposed to be a red rose tree, and we accidentally planted a white one instead. If the Queen were to find out, we'd all have our heads chopped off. So you see, we're doing the best we can to...
The Queen is coming!
No sooner had the second gardener said this than he threw himself flat upon his face along with the other 2. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. They were all shaped very much like the 3 gardeners. Next, 10 courtiers who were ornamented with diamonds. They were followed by 10 royal children skipping merrily along, hand in hand, and decorated with hearts. The guests were close behind. They were mostly kings and queens. When Alice saw who was among them, she could not believe her eyes. It was the White Rabbit, talking in a hurried, nervous manner and smiling at everything being said. But he failed to notice Alice. The Knave of Hearts followed next, carrying the king's crown on a velvet cushion. Last of all came the King and Queen of Hearts. Because she would have felt foolish bowing to a pack of cards, Alice remained upright. When they were opposite Alice, the procession stopped, and the Queen spoke to the Knave of Hearts.
Who is this?
I don't know, Your Majesty.
Idiot! What's your name, child?
Alice.
The Queen motioned to the 3 gardeners, who were still flat on the ground.
And who are these?
It was hard for the Queen to tell who they were, because the pattern on their backs was the same. For all she knew, they might have been soldiers, or courtiers, or even her own children.
Knave, turn them over.
Yes, Your Majesty.
Oh, so it's the gardeners, is it? Get up.
The 3 gardeners jumped to their feet and began bowing to everybody.
Enough of that. What have you been doing here?
May it please Your Majesty, we were trying to paint the...
I see. Off with their heads.
The procession moved on, and 3 soldiers were sent back to perform the executions. But Alice quickly hid the gardeners in a large flower pot. The soldiers briefly searched around for them, and then quietly marched back to the others. When they returned, the Queen was waiting for them.
Are their heads off?
Their heads are gone, Your Majesty.
By this time, Alice had caught up with them, and the Queen spoke to her.
Can you play croquet?
Yes.
Come on, then.
As she walked along, Alice didn't notice who was beside her, until she felt a tap on her shoulder.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
White Rabbit, do you know how hard I've been trying to catch you? Just to find out why you were in such a hurry.
You have my apology, but had I stopped, I would have been missing from the Queen's croquet game. And if that had happened, I would have been missing my head.
The procession finally reached the croquet ground, and the Queen made sure she had everyone's attention before giving her command.
Get to your places!
It was the most curious field for playing croquet that Alice had ever seen. It was filled with ridges and furrows. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets live flamingos. Soldiers formed the arches by doubling up and standing on their hands and feet. Alice found it difficult managing her flamingo. Every time she would straighten its neck out, ready to give the hedgehog a blow, the flamingo would twist around and look at Alice.
This is a very difficult game to participate in, especially when the hedgehog wants to run in the other direction.
Everyone played the game at once instead of taking turns. This only added to the confusion and to the impatience of the Queen.
Off with her head! Off with his head!
Finally, every one of the other players, except the King, the Queen, and Alice, were under sentence of execution. As the Queen approached, Alice thought for sure she would be next, but she was relieved when the Queen changed the subject.
Have you seen the mock turtle yet?
What is a mock turtle? I've never seen nor heard of one.
It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from, young lady. Come along, then, and he shall tell you his story.
As they walked off, Alice overheard the King, in a low voice, pardon everyone. Soon Alice and the Queen came upon a griffin lying fast asleep in the sun. The Queen called out to the creature,
Up, lazy thing, and take this young lady to see the mock turtle. I've got to go back and look after some executions.
As the Queen walked away, the griffin stood up and chuckled.
She's a lot of fun, isn't she?
What do you mean? She's no fun at all, executing everyone like she does.
Oh, that's just a game the Queen likes to play. No one has really ever been executed.
Alice was pleased to hear this, and soon was on her way following the griffin along a rock-laden trail. Before long, they came within sight of the mock turtle. He was sitting sad and lonely on a small rock ledge. As they drew nearer, Alice could hear him sighing as if his heart would break in two, and she felt very sorry for him.
Why is he so sad?
It's all his imagination. He really has no sorrow. Come on.
So they went up to the mock turtle, who looked at them with large, tearful eyes, but said nothing. Finally, the griffin spoke.
This young lady wants to know your history.
Well, you see, once I was a real turtle. When we were little, we went to school in the sea.
What kind of courses did you take?
Only the important subjects, miss, like reeling and writhing to begin with. Then the different branches of arithmetic. Ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision.
Alice did not understand, but she continued the conversation anyway.
How many hours a day did you study your lessons?
10 hours the first day, 9 the next, and so on.
What a curious plan.
The griffin ruffled his feathers and wagged his long tail.
It may seem curious to you, but that's the reason they're called lessons, because they lesson each day. Now that you've heard the mock turtle's story, would you like to hear his song?
Oh, yes, please, if you would be so kind.
Sing her turtle soup, will you, old fellow?
The mock turtle gave a sigh and began his song.
Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for two pennies worth only of beautiful soup? Pennies worth only of beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup.
The mock turtle began to repeat the chorus, when a sudden cry was heard at a distance.
The trial is beginning.
The griffin took Alice by the hand, and together they ran back toward the castle. When they arrived, they found the king and queen seated on their thrones, with a great crowd assembled around them. There were birds and beasts of every kind, as well as a whole pack of cards. The knave stood before them in chains. Nearby was the White Rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll in the other. Alice noticed a table in the center with a dish of tarts on it. The king called out to the White Rabbit.
Harold, read the charges.
The rabbit blew a loud blast on the trumpet. Then he read from the scroll.
The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them all away.
The crowd murmured their disapproval, but the king quieted them down with his gavel.
Call the witness to the stand.
Alice, come forward.
As Alice walked toward the center, she began to grow. And by the time she reached the stand, her head almost touched the ceiling. The king called up to her.
You know about this tart theft.
Why, the tarts are right there on the table.
The king looked at the tarts and was very embarrassed. Then he wrote something in his book, stopping to point at Alice.
Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high are to leave the court.
I'm not a mile high, and I won't go at any rate. Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just this very minute.
The queen, who had remained silent until now, rose from her throne.
Off with her head!
Why should I listen to you? You're nothing but a pack of cards.
At this, the whole pack rose up in the air and came flying down upon Alice. She fought with all her might, trying to beat them all. Suddenly, Alice found herself lying on the bank with her head on the lap of her sister, who was brushing away the dead leaves that had fallen from the trees onto her face.
Wake up, Alice, dear. Oh, my, what a long sleep you've had. Oh, I've had such a curious dream.
Alice told her sister about all of her strange adventures. And as she listened to Alice, the young woman closed her eyes, imagining how this same little girl would someday grow up and how she might gather her own children around her, making their faces bright and eager with many a strange tale. Perhaps even with the dream of Wonderland so long ago.